I remember the sound of the wind long before I learned to listen to it. Back then it was just noise. A restless breath rolling down the valley, bending the pine tops and scattering the scent of resin and rain. I'd sit on the porch of my cabin with a mug of black coffee and pretend I didn't notice how empty the chair beside me was. Folks in town said a man could go mad living alone out here. I suppose they were half right. The valley was called Whispering Pines even before I came. Travelers claimed that on quiet nights the forest would murmur like a choir beneath the stars. I laughed at that once. But laughter is a thing that fades when the world stops giving you reasons for it. After my wife Clara passed from the fever, I traded the noise of people for the hush of these woods. Out here, silence was honest. Most mornings began the same. The dawn light spilled through the trees like thin honey. The dew glimmered on needles and spiderwebs. The smell of pine pitch and damp earth filled my lungs. I'd chop wood until my hands blistered, patch the roof where the crows pecked holes, then sit by the creek where the trout flashed silver in the current. Everything alive had its rhythm. Only I was out of tune. It was late autumn when the first whisper came. That day the wind had stilled. The forest felt like it was holding its breath. Even the birds were quiet, and that kind of quiet can press against a man's skull until he starts to imagine things. I was mending a snare by the tree line when I heard it. Soft, almost shy, like words half remembered from a dream. Elias. I froze. My name, spoken clear as daylight, drifting between the pines. I turned expecting to see one of the loggers from town playing a trick, but there was no one. Only the trunks standing tall and straight and the long shadows pooling between them. I told myself it was wind caught in the needles, a trick of sound. Yet that night as I sat by the fire, the whisper returned. Gentler this time, curling through the cracks in the cabin walls. Elias, do you remember? The mug slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor. Coffee seeped into the boards like dark blood. My heart hammered so loud I thought the forest might hear it. I didn't sleep. I kept the lantern burning till dawn, staring at the door as if something might push through it. But nothing came, only the hush of snow beginning to fall outside. When the storm cleared, I walked to town. I needed voices that were human. The clatter of boots on wood, the smell of tobacco and sweat and sawdust. The saloon was half full of men who measured their loneliness in glasses. Old Tom Abernathy looked up from his cards when I entered. "Boone," he said, squinting. "Didn't expect to see you before spring thaw." I told him about the whisper. The room went still. Someone coughed. Someone else spat into a tin. Tom nodded slowly. "You've been living too close to the pines," he said. "Old folks say they talk sometimes. They remember things we'd rather forget." Laughter broke the tension. Uneasy, brittle. But Tom's eyes didn't join it. "If they're calling your name," he added, "you best start listening, or leave." I rode back under a bruised sky, the words rattling in my head. That night, the forest sighed like a living thing. Between the gusts, I thought I heard Clara's voice. Not clear, but enough to stir the ache I'd buried for years. I stepped outside, lantern in hand. Snow glittered in the moonlight. The pines swayed slow, like giants breathing. The wind brushed past me, whispering through the needles. Not gone, just waiting. My lantern flame fluttered, and for the briefest moment, I felt warmth where no warmth should be, as if unseen fingers had touched my cheek. Then it was gone. I stood there till dawn, listening. The pines said nothing more, but I knew then that silence could speak, and that something in this valley had begun to wake. The morning after that night, the forest looked ordinary again. Sunlight spilled through the pines, turning the frost into diamonds. I told myself what I'd heard was grief talking, the kind that never dies, only changes its shape. But as I walked the ridge trail toward the stream, that quiet returned, heavy as a held breath. The forest wasn't empty. It was listening. I followed the old hunting path that wound down through the valley. Half a mile out, I found boot prints. Not mine, not fresh. Whoever left them was traveling light, a single staff marking the dirt beside each step. I should have turned back, but solitude had made me curious in strange ways. So I followed. By noon, I spotted a figure ahead, sitting on a fallen log where the trail narrowed between two cliffs. He was wrapped in a weathered blanket, his hair silver as creek frost, his skin lined with the years of a long road. His eyes lifted before I spoke, calm and dark as still water. "Morning," I called. "Didn't think anyone came this far into the valley." He smiled faintly. "The land remembers me," he said. His voice was low, but it carried, like the first rumble of thunder before a storm. I stepped closer. "Name's Elias Boone. You passing through?" "Passing," he said, though it sounded more like returning. "They call me Greyfeather." The name hung in the air between us. He motioned for me to sit, and for reasons I couldn't explain, I did. His presence carried no threat, just a quiet knowing, like the forest itself had taken human form. After a while, he nodded toward the trees. You heard them, haven't you? I didn't answer. My gut twisted, but I met his gaze. If you mean the wind, then sure, I hear it every day. Gray Feather smiled again, sadder this time. Not the wind, the ones beneath it. The old voices. The roots remember. The pines whisper because they are not done speaking. I let out a dry laugh. I'm not much for ghost stories. He turned his face toward the canopy. They aren't ghosts, Elias. They are memories. The land keeps what men forget. Love, grief, blood. His hand brushed the bark of the fallen log. Every tree here grew from soil that once held a story. The words shouldn't have unsettled me, but they did. Then what do they want? I asked. To be heard, he said simply. To be forgiven. We sat in silence for a long time. Somewhere high above, a hawk cried out, and its echo rolled down the valley like a bell. Gray Feather rose, leaning on his staff. You carry sorrow, he said. The forest knows your heart. That is why it called your name. I felt the chill crawl up my spine. How do you know that? He smiled, his eyes catching the light. Because it once called mine. Before I could ask what he meant, he started walking up the trail, slow but sure, the staff tapping a steady rhythm. Wait, I called. If the forest remembers, what happens when it forgets? He paused without turning. Then the valley dies. And just like that, he was gone into the trees. I stayed there long after he disappeared, listening. The wind rustled faintly through the needles, soft, almost shy, like laughter fading into memory. That night, I couldn't bring myself to light the fire. The cabin walls felt too close, the silence too thick. Instead, I sat outside beneath the stars, watching the pines sway under the moonlight. Every creak, every sigh of the branches seemed to carry meaning. Once I thought I heard a whisper near the edge of the clearing. He remembers. The voice wasn't Clara's this time. It was deeper, ancient, tired. When the wind shifted, I thought I saw movement among the trees, a faint shimmer, like heat rising off stone. It vanished when I blinked. Sleep didn't come easy. My dreams were filled with faces I didn't recognize. Men and women in old clothes, standing among burning trees, reaching out as if begging me to see them. I woke with a taste of smoke on my tongue. The next morning I found something outside my door, a feather, gray and long, wedged into the crack of the porch rail. I didn't need to ask who had left it. The valley was speaking, and now I was listening. The third night after meeting Gray Feather, I dreamed of fire. Not the small, familiar kind that warms a cabin hearth. This one roared like a living beast. It tore through the trees in waves of orange and black, the sky bleeding smoke. I could hear people screaming in the distance, their voices swallowed by wind and flame. The ground itself seemed to cry out. And beneath it all, faint but clear, came the same whisper that had haunted my waking hours. Do not forget. When I woke, the air in my cabin reeked of burnt pine, though the stove was cold and the ashes in the grate untouched. My hands shook as I stepped outside. The morning was bright, the forest alive with birdsong, but I could still feel heat radiating from the ground, as if the earth held memory in its bones. Down by the creek, the water reflected the pale sky. For a moment, I thought I saw smoke curling across its surface. Then it cleared, leaving only ripples where a trout broke the current. I told myself it was imagination, but in my gut, I knew it wasn't. By midday, I hiked toward the northern ridge, following the trail where Gray Feather had vanished. The forest there grew denser, older. The trunks were thick as walls, their barks scarred with age. Some trees leaned toward each other, their branches twisted together like clasped hands. Halfway up the slope, I found a clearing and stopped dead in my tracks. The ground was black, charred. Even after what must have been decades, the earth here bore the marks of a great burn. The trees that had survived were hollow, open like mouths gasping for air. Beneath my boots, the soil crumbled to ash. It was a graveyard of roots. Kneeling, I picked up a piece of wood no longer than my palm. The inside was still streaked with soot, the edges gray and brittle. But what struck me most was the faint carving on one side. A circle surrounding a single pine needle. It looked deliberate, ritualistic. A gust of wind swept through the clearing, and for the first time I didn't hear just rustling. I heard voices. They weren't words exactly, more like a chorus of sighs, a crowd trying to remember how to speak. I closed my eyes and the world changed. The clearing came alive with fire. Men in rough coats shouted orders. Women clutched children, their faces lit by the blaze. And among them, I saw a younger man, eyes wide with terror, axe in hand, trying to cut a path through the flames. For a heartbeat, his gaze met mine across the years. Then everything went white. I woke on the ground, the sun dipping low through the trees. My clothes were damp with sweat, my hands blackened with ash. I staggered to my feet, dizzy, half believing I'd gone mad. On my way back down the trail, I saw Greyfeather waiting by a stump, as if he'd been there all along. "You found it," he said quietly. I swallowed hard. "What happened here?" He looked past me at the blackened trees. "Long ago, settlers built their cabins on this land. They cleared the forest too fast, took more than they needed. The earth grew angry, or maybe just tired. Fire came. Some say it was lightning, others say it was vengeance. Either way, the valley burned for 7 days, and I stared at him. And the people? He met my eyes. Gone, but not forgotten. The pines remember what they saw. They whisper their sorrow to any who'll listen. A silence stretched between us, deep as the forest floor. Finally, I said, "Why me? Why now?" "Because you, too, carry fire in your heart," he said. "Grief is a kind of burning. The forest hears it." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small object, a piece of charred bark etched with the same circle and needle symbol I'd seen in the clearing. "This was theirs," he said, pressing it into my hand. "They marked their bond with the land. Even in ruin, they believed the trees would remember them." I turned the relic over, tracing the lines with my thumb. The carving felt warm, pulsing faintly, like a heartbeat. Greyfeather's gaze softened. "The forest doesn't haunt you, Elias. It calls to you. It wants to be forgiven." "Forgiven for what?" "For surviving," he said. Then he turned and walked into the trees, his figure fading like smoke. That night, I sat by the fire and stared at the piece of bark on my table. Its surface flickered in the lamplight, the symbol glowing faintly like an ember refusing to die. Outside, the pines swayed and whispered, a low song that almost sounded like prayer. And for the first time since Clara's passing, I whispered back. That night, sleep came like a thief, stealing time and leaving only dreams. I dreamt of Clara. She was standing by the old apple tree behind our first cabin, her hands folded around a basket of blossoms. The light in her hair was the same soft gold as the afternoon we said goodbye before I left for the war. She smiled, and in that smile was both forgiveness and farewell. When I reached for her, the blossoms turned to ash. Then the whisper came again, threading through the smoke like a breath. "Home, Elias. Come home." I woke with tears on my face. The fire in the hearth had gone out, but the embers glowed faintly, painting the cabin in the same ghostly red from my dream. Outside, the pines sighed against the dawn. I couldn't shake the feeling that something waited for me, not in the forest this time, but here, in the place I'd long called home. So I began to search. The cabin was full of time-worn things, old tools, dried herbs, the carved spoon Clara made before her hands trembled too much to hold a knife. Every corner held a memory I tried to bury. I opened every drawer, lifted every board, until my fingers found the loose plank beneath the bed. There, wrapped in cloth gone brittle with age, was a small bundle tied with faded ribbon. When I unfolded it, I found a letter. The paper was yellowed, the ink faint but legible. Clara's handwriting delicate and looping like vines. The top corner bore a dark stain, maybe from tears or rain. My breath caught as I read the first line. "My dearest Elias, if you are reading this, it means you came home after all." I sank onto the floor. The cabin blurred around me. Her words were gentle, but they cut deeper than any blade. She wrote of nights spent waiting by the window, of how she listened to the wind through the pines and pretended it carried my voice back from wherever the war had taken me. She spoke of loneliness, of how the valley seemed to keep breathing even when she could not. And near the end, "If I do not live to see you again, know that I forgive you. I forgive you for leaving, and for the silence that followed. The forest knows my heart now. Listen to it, Elias. It will tell you what I could not." I read those lines until the ink ran beneath my tears. The forest outside rustled softly, almost like it understood. All those nights I'd cursed the silence. Maybe it had never been silence at all. Maybe Clara's spirit had lived on in the whispering pines, trying to reach me through roots and wind and memory. I stepped outside, the letter clutched to my chest. The air was cold enough to sting, yet I felt warmth blooming somewhere deep within me. The trees swayed gently, the sound rising and falling like breath. I closed my eyes. "I'm listening," I said. The response came not as words, but as feeling. A deep, peaceful ache, as though the entire valley exhaled at once. Somewhere high above, a single pine cone loosened and fell, landing near my boots. I took it in my hand, small and rough and alive with scent. A seed of memory. When I turned to go back inside, I saw something I hadn't before. By the path leading to the creek, a small cluster of wildflowers had bloomed overnight, white petals glowing faintly in the morning light. I knelt, running my fingers through them, and realized they grew in the shape of a ring. A wedding band of blossoms, circling a smooth stone in the center. I laughed, a sound rusty with disuse, but real. For the first time in years, the valley didn't feel lonely. It felt awake. That evening, I placed Clara's letter on the mantel beside her portrait. I didn't light a candle. The moonlight through the window was enough. The forest hummed softly outside, and every creak of the cabin felt like her hand against my shoulder. When I finally slept, I dreamed of wind through pine needles. Not a haunting, but a lullaby. The valley had never felt so alive, and yet never so dangerous. It started as a whisper of wind, curling through the pines in gentle loops, teasing the needles like a child playing tag. By noon, the clouds had thickened into bruised shades of gray, rolling across the sky like ocean waves. Birds vanished into the branches, and the smell of rain mixed with pine resin, sharp and sweet. I had been gathering firewood for the coming frost when the first bolt struck. The sky cracked open with a light so white it burned my vision. Thunder rolled in layers like drums echoing across the ridges. The valley's whispers were gone, replaced by the roar of wind and rain hammering the cabin roof. I barely noticed when a cry cut through the storm. Human, small, terrified. Pulling my coat tight, I ran toward the sound, following the rushing water where the creek swelled into a torrent. Amid the thrashing branches, I saw him, a boy no older than 10, clinging to a fallen log as the flood threatened to sweep him away. "Hold on! Don't let go!" I shouted, my voice almost lost to the storm. Lightning struck nearby, splintering a pine and sending a shower of needles raining down. My heart hammered, each beat echoing like the roar of the tempest. But something inside me, a voice I hadn't heard in years, pushed me forward. I plunged into the icy water, gripping the boy's hand and yanking him toward the shore. Every step was a battle against the current. Every shout of the wind tried to steal us apart. But finally I dragged him to solid ground, collapsing with him into the mud, soaked and trembling. He looked at me with wide, terrified eyes, shivering from cold and fear. I thought I'd be gone," he stammered. "You're safe now," I said, gasping. "I've got you." The storm raged on, but somehow the fear in the boy's eyes reminded me of my own. The fear I had carried all these years, of losing someone, of failing, of being forgotten. The pines seemed to sigh above us, their needles vibrating with energy, whispering a melody I had only begun to understand. When the rain softened to a drizzle, the boy and I huddled beneath the leaning boughs of a great pine. I dried him as best I could with my coat, and for the first time, I felt the forest's voice more clearly than ever. Not a haunting, not a warning, but encouragement, guiding me, telling me to step forward, to do what I had always feared. "Why are you out here alone?" I asked gently. I ran away," he admitted, shivering. "Mama said not to, but I wanted to see the river." I nodded, understanding too well the pull of curiosity and rebellion, the need to confront the unknown. "The valley can be beautiful," I said, "but it can also be cruel. You have to respect it, just like life." The boy looked up at me and I saw a flicker of trust. That small, fragile spark reminded me that even after grief, there was still work to do. Courage was not the absence of fear. It was moving forward despite it. Hours later, when the storm passed and the clouds broke, we walked back to my cabin together. The creek had swollen and receded. The forest smelled fresh and raw. Pine needles littered the path like confetti after a celebration. The boy's hands clutched mine as we walked, the bond of shared survival more powerful than words. That night, I sat by the fire, the boy asleep on a blanket by my feet, and I realized something I had refused to admit. The whispers weren't just Clara's voice, or the voices of the past. They were the valley itself, the pines, teaching me the lesson I had refused to learn. That life does not end with loss, and that hope sometimes comes wrapped in the form of a stranger, or a child, or even the wind through a tree. I glanced out the window. The pines swayed gently in the moonlight, no longer threatening, no longer merely whispering. They seemed to nod, a quiet acknowledgement of courage, of life, of the first step toward redemption. And for the first time in years, I felt that maybe, just maybe, I was ready to listen and to act. The morning after the storm, the valley felt different, washed clean, yet heavier, as if the earth had exhaled its secrets and held its breath all at once. The boy, whom I learned was named Sam, slept soundly by the cabin hearth. I drank my coffee slowly, savoring the quiet, though it was a quiet full of expectation. Something had shifted. The whispers were no longer just fleeting sounds. They carried intention. They beckoned. I followed them, leaving Sam with a warning to stay put. The forest seemed eager, guiding me through moss-covered rocks and twisted roots toward the northern ridge I had glimpsed before. Birds flitted nervously above, and the pine needles glimmered with lingering raindrops, as though the valley itself were alive and awake. Halfway up, I saw it, a pine unlike any I had ever encountered. Its trunk was hollowed and gnarled, split from a lightning strike long ago, yet it stood tall and strong, almost regal. Sunlight filtered through the opening like a cathedral window, illuminating the interior in warm golden light. I approached, heart thudding. The air inside the hollow smelled of earth, pine, and smoke from fires I had never seen. It felt alive, pulsating faintly, as though breathing. This was no ordinary tree. This was a spirit tree, an anchor of memory and hope, born from grief and resilience alike. I knelt to peer inside. There, tucked in a natural cavity, lay objects both delicate and powerful. A rusted tin cup, fragments of a worn blanket, a carved wooden figure of a bear. Each was relic of lives once lived. Settlers and native people, their stories intertwined in ways I could only guess at. The pines whispered as I touched them, murmurs of sorrow and forgiveness curling through the air. Then I saw it, a small, almost imperceptible carving near the base of the hollow, a circle enclosing a single pine needle. I had seen this symbol before, in the burnt clearing and in Greyfeather's hands. Its repetition spoke of continuity, of remembrance. I traced it with my fingers, feeling an almost imperceptible warmth radiate through my skin. Elias Boone, a voice said softly. Not human, not Wynn, somewhere in between. Do you understand yet? I swallowed, my throat tight. I think I'm beginning to. The spirit tree seemed to respond to my admission. The hollow glowed faintly, as if approving my presence. I could feel the valley's memory pulsing around me. The lives of the forgotten settlers, the children, the native tribes, all converging in a single heartbeat that connected past and present. I spent hours within the hollow, arranging and cataloging what I found. Each artifact became a story, each story a seed of remembrance. I realized that the valley's whispers were not merely warnings, they were invitations. Invitations to preserve, to honor, to bear witness. When I finally emerged, the sun was dipping behind the ridge, casting long shadows across the valley. I glanced back at the spirit tree. The hollow seemed emptier now, yet fuller somehow, alive with the invisible weight of memory. The boy appeared at the edge of the clearing, eyes wide. Did you see it? He asked. I did, I said. And it is waiting for us, for everyone who will listen. Greyfeather's words from that first meeting came back to me. The forest doesn't haunt you, Elias. It calls to you. It wants to be forgiven. Now I understood. The spirit tree was a testament to forgiveness, to continuity, to the delicate thread that binds memory to life. And for the first time, I felt the valley's whispers shift from sorrow to encouragement, urging me forward. That night, I returned to the cabin carrying small relics I had taken from the hollow, careful to respect their home. I placed them on the mantel beside Clara's letter and portrait. The pines outside seemed to sway gently, as though nodding in approval. And I whispered into the night, feeling the valley answer in kind. We will remember. Together. The spirit tree had become more than a relic of memory. It was a living testament. I returned to it each morning, carrying charcoal, a knife, scraps of birch bark, and a resolve I hadn't known I possessed in years. I began to carve the names and stories of the forgotten into the tree's sturdy bark. Every settler who had perished in the fires, every child who had vanished into the pines, every native elder who had walked these trails before the cabins. Their lives were etched alongside the natural grain of the tree. The pines whispered constantly now, guiding my hand. Sometimes it was a name, sometimes a story, sometimes just a sigh of encouragement. It was as though the valley itself had chosen me as its recorder, a bridge between the living and the memory of those who came before. One morning, Sam joined me. He watched silently as I traced the delicate letters, then asked, "Why do we do this, Elias?" I paused, letting the knife hover over the bark. Because stories are all that survive when people leave. Names carved in wood last longer than names whispered in the wind. And the valley, it deserves to be remembered. He nodded, understanding more than I could explain. Together we worked in companionable silence, the only sound the steady hum of the forest and the occasional rustle of a pine cone tumbling down. The act of carving was meditative, almost prayerful. Each name released a sigh of relief from the valley, each story a small wave of peace. I realized that forgiveness and remembrance are intertwined. One cannot truly forgive unless they remember, and one cannot preserve memory without acknowledging what was lost. By evening, the tree was covered in an intricate tapestry of life, suffering, courage, and hope. The carvings glowed faintly in the dying light, as if the spirit tree itself approved. One evening, as the sun painted the valley in molten gold, Greyfeather returned. His eyes were softer now, filled with a quiet approval. You have begun the work of memory, and he said, the valley listens, and the valley forgives. I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my chest. I only hope it's enough. It is, he said, for those who listen after you will add their own stories, and thus the valley's memory continues. That night, the pines sang a song I had never heard before. Not a whisper, but a chorus. It rose and fell in waves, a lullaby for the valley. for those who had passed and for those who remained. I sat beside the spirit tree, exhausted, stood on my hands, heart full of quiet joy. In the days that followed, travelers began to appear at the edge of the forest. Some came by accident, some drawn by tales of a talking forest and a strange old tree. I welcomed them, telling only what I was ready to share. The valley became a place of learning and reflection, a bridge between the past and the living. And every night I returned to the spirit tree, carving a little more, a name, a story, a memory. And the pines whispered in gratitude, "You listen, Elias, and in listening, you have become one of us." That was the first time I understood truly that the forest does not simply hold memory. It demands participation, it asks for action, it asks for love, and in return, it grants peace. I carved until my hands bled, and when they healed, I carved again. The valley had stories to tell, and I would not let them go unheard. The valley had changed since the storm, since the spirit tree had begun to fill with memory. I spent my days carving, cataloging, and guiding travelers who sought the forest whispers. And yet, despite the quiet joy, a sense of anticipation lingered in the air, as if the forest itself was waiting. It was late afternoon when Greyfeather appeared on the ridge, leaning on his staff, the fading sun painting his silver hair in warm light. He moved slower now, more fragile than before, yet his eyes held the same depth, the same knowing. "You've done well, Elias," he said, his voice soft but carrying over the valley. "The stories are safe with you now." I felt a lump in my throat. "I've tried," I said. "I only hope I'm doing it right." He smiled faintly. "Doing it right isn't the same as doing it perfectly. Remember, memory is alive. It changes, it grows. What matters is that it continues." I nodded, looking at the spirit tree, its hollow trunk glowing faintly in the soft light. "I've begun to understand. The forest, it doesn't just want to be remembered. It wants to live through us." Greyfeather's eyes softened. "And now you will tell the stories, not just the pines or the wind. Your voice carries them forward." I swallowed. "Me?" "Yes," he said. "You've listened, Elias. You've learned to feel the valley's sorrow and hope. Now it is time to speak. Tell the travelers, the children, the townsfolk. Keep the valley alive. That is your duty and your honor." I felt the weight of responsibility settle over me like a mantle. The forest, the spirit tree, the valley itself, all had entrusted me with their history, and with that trust came purpose. Greyfeather leaned on his staff, looking toward the far horizon where the mountains met the sky. "My time here is ending. The stories I carried are old, and my voice grows faint, but they will live on, Elias, through you." I stepped closer, placing my hand on his shoulder. "I promise. I'll keep them alive." He nodded, eyes closing briefly as if in relief. Then with a slow, deliberate step, he began walking toward the forest's edge. I watched him fade into the trees, the light catching the mist around him, until he vanished entirely. The valley was silent for a moment, save for the whispering of the pines. Then, as if approving, the wind swept through the trees, rustling needles and shaking loose small cones that fell around the spirit tree like blessings. I stood alone by the hollow, feeling a profound connection to Greyfeather, to Clara, to every soul who had walked this land before me. The pines whispered softly, not a call, not a question, but a statement. "We trust you." That night I sat by the cabin fire, Sam asleep on the blanket beside me, and I began to speak aloud. Softly at first, then with growing confidence. I told him the stories I had learned, the stories I had carved, and those I had imagined, giving voice to the valley's memory. The pines outside swayed gently in the moonlight, their whispers harmonizing with my voice. For the first time, I felt a profound sense of belonging, not just to the valley, but to the stories themselves. I was no longer just a listener. I was a keeper, a storyteller, a bridge between the past and the future. And as the night deepened, the spirit tree stood behind me, hollow and glowing faintly, a witness to the promise I had made. I whispered to the valley, to the forest, to the pines. "I will remember. I will speak. I will keep you alive." And somewhere, in the quiet between the branches, I could have sworn the forest whispered back, "Then we live." The valley had begun to breathe differently. The spirit tree, now adorned with countless carvings and relics, seemed to pulse with quiet pride. Travelers and townsfolk, drawn by whispers and rumors, arrived more often, seeking stories, solace, or simply the touch of history alive in the forest. One evening, as autumn painted the ridges golden crimson, I heard the first idea of a festival. It came not as a whisper, but as a gathering of intent, a murmuring among the townsfolk who had begun to understand the valley's memory. They wanted to honor it, to honor those who had been lost. I stood beside the spirit tree, Sam at my side, as lanterns were brought from town. Families, elders, and children approached, carrying oil lamps and homemade lanterns. The forest seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. I addressed the crowd, my voice unsteady but growing stronger. Tonight we remember those who walked these lands before us. We honor the lives and stories that the valley whispers to us, that the spirit tree carries, and we celebrate that memory, alive, still with us. The townsfolk nodded, their eyes reflecting the glow of the lanterns. One by one they began to light the lamps, holding them high and placing them carefully among the roots of the spirit tree and along the paths through the pines. Each flicker of light shimmered against the trees, shadows dancing like ancient spirits joining the celebration. I began to speak aloud the stories we had carved. Tales of courage, love, sorrow, and hope. The valley, it seemed, was listening, and perhaps it was forgiving, too. Sam held my hand, eyes wide in wonder, as we walked among the lights. "Elias," he whispered, "it's beautiful." "Yes, Sam," I said softly. "It's alive now. The valley remembers, and tonight we remember together." The wind rose gently through the pines, carrying a symphony of whispers that now felt like laughter and song. The spirit tree glowed faintly, reflecting the lights and shadows, its hollow trunk a beacon for all who came to honor the past. Elders told their own tales, children repeated the stories I shared, and travelers carved their initials and short memories into small pieces of bark, placing them around the base of the tree. Each action, each story, wove a tapestry of remembrance, connecting past and present in ways words alone could not. As the night deepened, the valley was transformed. Lanterns floated along the creek like fireflies, their light mirrored in the water. The forest, once silent or sorrowful, sang with life and memory. I looked up at the spirit tree, now crowned with gentle illumination from the lanterns and the moonlight above, and I realized fully that healing comes when memory is shared, when grief is not born alone, but woven into community, into story, into the living world. Before I left the spirit tree that night, I whispered once more, for the valley, for Clara, for all who had passed, we remember, we honor, we live. And in return, the forest whispered back, a soft, steady chorus carried on the wind. We live. Years had passed since the Festival of Light. The valley had changed, yet remained the same. The spirit tree stood tall, hollow, and sacred, its bark etched with countless names and stories. The pines whispered continuously, softer now, like an old song carried on the wind, a lullaby for those who listened. I had grown older, my hair silvered, my hands roughened by years of carving and tending to the valley. Sam, now a young man, walked beside me, carrying small lanterns for the forest paths. We moved in silence, not because words were unnecessary, but because some things speak more clearly without them. I paused at the base of the spirit tree, placing my hand on the worn bark. Memories pulsed faintly beneath my fingertips. The settlers, the native elders, Clara, Gray Feather, the boy I had saved from the flood, all of them living still in the valley's memory. It struck me then that silence is not absence. Silence is presence, the listening heart, the space where stories find life. Every whisper of pine needles, every sway of branches, every crackle of embers in my hearth carried meaning. When travelers came now, I shared the stories gently, guiding them to listen rather than simply hear. They learned to move slowly through the pines, to touch the spirit tree, to respect the lives that had shaped the valley. Each person who left carried a piece of the valley with them, and in doing so, ensured its memory would continue. One late autumn evening, I sat by my cabin fire, the forest humming around me. Sam slept nearby, the lanterns casting long shadows across the walls. I took up my carving tools one last time, marking a single simple phrase into a piece of bark. We remember, we live. Outside, the pines whispered in agreement, a soft chorus that rustled like breath. I closed my eyes, letting the quiet wash over me. I could feel Clara's presence, Gray Feather's wisdom, the boy's laughter from the storm long past, and I realized that the valley had taught me everything I needed to know. Grief can speak through silence, memory can live through action, and love never truly leaves those who listen. The spirit tree, the valley, the pines. They were alive, and so was I, a keeper of stories, a bridge between past and present. As the stars glittered above the ridge, I spoke softly to the forest, to the valley, to anyone who might be listening. Carry these stories with you. Listen, and the silence will speak. The pines swayed, the wind answered, and the valley, as it had for generations, whispered back, we live. And in that eternal, quiet rhythm, the circle of memory was complete.